Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarian.
Recent Tartarian. Recent Tartarian. Recent Tartarian. Recent Tartarian.
Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarian.
What's up, everybody? I hope the audio is working. I was getting a little cocky there. I'm worried that No, it looks like it's fine. So welcome back to the show. I'm Andreas, Xirtus, Memory Man, David Santos, Anthony Yost, Keenan. I love you. I thank you. I'm glad you're here. Today's an interesting day. I'm drinking a live sparkling probiotic kombucha. They're not like sponsoring me or anything, but I like it. It's not bad. It's like got like ginger in it. I feel pretty good. So we're gonna cover some stuff. Yesterday was weird because I felt like they cut me off in the middle of the stream, but it was like 2 hours in, so it's a good time to be cut off. Sometimes you need a break, so it's thank you, powers that be, bank me. Please, sir, I'd like some more. I'm going to put a little bit of the ending there at the beginning here, and we'll just continue on. Yesterday we were talking about the flooding of the Nile, the idea of erosion, Hancock and Carlson's ideas, Dubé's ideas. I'm gonna bring in some more people's ideas just to show that like I've listened and I've heard you, and I want you to know like I have looked at these things. But the reason that I feel like Hancock is as smart as he is and as handsome as he is, this idea of the 20,000-year-old, 12,000-year-old thing because of erosion, just because of erosion, isn't gonna fly. And I don't want to sound like Poirot or, really Agatha Christie embodying her masculinity. But let's be real. Poirot is right. And I don't know if you guys know who Poirot is, but Poirot is the Belgian detective with the scarred face from World War I that he had to grow a mustache to cover his scar. And he's got this great mustache. And he's a detective, and he's made up by Agatha Christie, but he's a great made up detective. And one of the things that they say in the show, some lady is like, "But I saw him put the evidence right there," and Poirot is like, "Forgive me, madame, but no, you did not see him put the evidence right there. You saw simply what you were meant to see." Right? And that's the thing. You often see simply what you're meant to see. I mean, it's not always true, and that's in regard to the constellation of Leo, because yes, they're aligned to the constellation of Leo. This is important in the 12th century. But it could have easily been that someone faked it, and also our understanding of constellations. I'm not going to go there. I'm just saying it's plausible that this was actually done in the 12th century. But I have a whole other theory. Check this out. Things built on top of each other, and this is an area that was very important to people for as long as you want, all the way back to and we can talk about. The Mayan calendar and the Egyptian calendar and the Indian calendar have epochs and ages of resets that have happened, right? So it's not the first reset. Calm down, kids. And it's not the last reset. Hold on to your seats. But there's been probably 12 resets before the 13th reset, which has been going on since we were wee little lads and lasses. So I'm going to show you some more of the memeology that is the internet. Let me just see if I can pull this up properly. Otacon, that's not what I was even looking at. Yeah, okay, calm down. Oh, wait. Yeah, no, this is fine, because we're going to get into the volcano. We're going to get also into Yahweh and Canaanite religions. It's going to be a fun day, but let me just start with where we're at. The flooding of the Nile has been an important natural cycle in Egypt since ancient times. It was celebrated by Egyptians as an annual holiday for 2 weeks starting August 15th, known as the Wafa el Nil. Now, I talked about this yesterday. I just want, again, because we got cut off, I want to make sure everyone knows, because this is important. This is setting up the next thing. I swear it's important. There is a calendar. No, where am I going to find that? Farming? Okay. When you look at the Egyptian calendar, it's in 3 pieces. Okay? Instead of having a 4-season calendar, you have a flooding season calendar. You have a summer, I guess you could almost call it. It's like, so it's inundation. There's a better term for this. Hold on. Aket, Peret, and Shamu. Okay? So it's like Aket, Peret, Shamu, the 4 seasons. And one is like the flooding season, one is the like peaceful solstice season, and one is the harvest season. So you've got flooding, you've got working, with the longest days of the year, and you have harvest. And this makes sense if you're in America, even where we have in the south. I mean, I guess in Southern California or something like that. If you're in places closer, not quite, but more equatorial, There's still seasons, but they're not 4 seasons. I mean, we don't have the same kind of winter season, but because other places do, you get flooding from those places. The Colorado River, for instance, runs into California from Colorado and even beyond Colorado, but the mountains of Colorado are very important because they saturate with snow. Egypt, similar situation. Let me show you a picture. So here's Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia. And you'd think, oh, look at all this water from the Mediterranean. No, calm down. What's going on is water's going from Ethiopia and Sudan into Egypt because these are tall mountains, right? Khartoum and Guma. And I think there's another one there besides Guma. Let me remember the name. Guna, sorry, and Gojam. There we go, because I mixed them up. There's Gojam and Guna, but they're both in very important parts of Ethiopia that are volcano zones. Volcano zones, always going to come up over and over again, but this is a shield volcano, which is just like, bruh. Okay, so it's also an area where civilizations are supposed to have emerged from. There's a big article I read years ago, and I didn't find it for this, but about people who are runners from Ethiopia who come from Mount Guna, and the breathing. It's like the Nepali or the Bolivians in Sucre, they're at such a high altitude, right, 13,500 feet above sea level, that they get less oxygen or something, so they're better at running. They don't need as much oxygen when they get to this crazy sprinting. I don't know. Anyway, Mount Guna, important stuff. But what happens is the water runs off, okay? You've got the Blue Nile and you got a White Nile, and the Blue Nile going in from Ethiopia and the White Nile coming in from Sudan, and it also flows the other direction in South Sudan. But most of the time, you're seeing this huge amount of water going into Egypt, and Egypt's not known exactly for rain seasons. There used to be a lot more rain, apparently, in Egypt, by the way, and especially up in Heliopolis, On, Alexandria, all the same place. But what they used to call Raked, I found out recently, another name, because people didn't like to call it Alexandria when they were living in Alexandria. They're like, screw that guy. So they called it Raked, which is the edifice of Ra, but they wouldn't even admit that for centuries. They're like, no. Ra just means monument. So it was just the block, the monument, the city, the building, something like that. And as time went on, they're like, okay, let's just be honest. This is the city of Ra because it's the city of, and you know what? Let's get there when we get there. But it's the city of somebody, and I'll tell you who. So White Nile, Blue Nile, the Nile. The water's flowing in. You have a seasonal flood. You have actually 3 seasons of floods because it'll melt off in the solstice period at the top of the mountain when the most sun hits Eritrea and Ethiopia, and that's different than when there's a flooding season in the Sudan because there's more. I forget if that's the reason. I believe it's because Khartoum has more rainfall, and so there's also a continual rainfall. Plus, there's Lake Tana. Lake Tana overfills, doesn't have a place to go. It used to, and this is fed by Jabil al-Bray and Reb rivers running from Gumara from the mountains. So the mountains runoff goes into the lakes overfill, and then that ends up in the Blue Nile. Until they started building the Blue Nile Falls Power Station, which has also completely affected everything, is that they have power stations at the bases of these places in Egypt. Okay, I don't want to go too deep into this today. I will save it for another time. I just want you to know Khartoum and Guna. I think that's right, Guna. I hope I got that right. The Grand Renaissance Dam, and then if you go up here, the Aswan Dam. So the Aswan Dam further completely changed the flow of the Nile and therefore the weather patterns of Egypt, which were an important thing, and you'll understand why in a second. But also you'll see that the silting of areas. They have the Suez Canal now, but there was originally another canal that was more natural and was completely destroyed. Maybe not natural, maybe someone had something to do with it, but the thing is, this area used to be open, okay, and then it closed off, and then this area used to be closed, and it's been opened up again, and we have evidence of that, and it's freaking crazy. Now here's a picture of Egypt today, not today, but often enough because of rain seasons. You'll see the flooding isn't actually because of rain in Egypt. It's rain that's further up the coast or even south. A lot of the time south is where the mountains are coming from, and the fresh water is flowing in. So this used to be a thing. Valleys would fill with water, hence the word wadi, which is where valley comes from. and also where rivers flow at different times and seasons. Okay, and I hope I get enough impact on you that this is relevant today, but it used to be even more relevant because you can see how tall these mountains were, that water used to go through these zones, and this is happening all over Africa and all over Egypt, but it's always been happening in Egypt, and so much so that Egypt's entire society, I'm going to say, is built upon this idea of the flooding of the Nile. Okay, so the flooding of the Nile is the most important. How important is it? The most important thing in Egypt, because it's the holiday that celebrates harvest. It's why they have 3 seasons. It's the reason why they're obsessed with solstice, and it's something that kills people. If you don't know when the flood's coming, people will die. If people aren't prepared for the flood, even if they survive, a swamp will destroy their home, and then people will die of diseases in swamp that hasn't been able to be flowing. So they have to have flowing and irrigation and crazy amounts of... Okay, so I hope I've impressed upon you the essentiality of how important flooding was until the British period, where they started building reservoirs and dams. And this completely destroyed this culture. And we talked also yesterday, I want to just also put this out, the Nilometer. What is the Nilometer? Well, the Nilometer is a structure for measuring the Nile's river clarity. So it's this huge building, and there's a number of them, and they're literally meters of Niles, and they're used to measure different aspects of the cleanliness of the water, the flow of the water, etc. It's very... we've seen pictures of this all the time in Starfort research. These are very common in Victor Schauberger drawings, spirals with totems, with observatories, with people able to actually walk around and go through these things. That's how big they are. Oh, and let's just look again at Alexandria. Do I have Alexandria picture just so you have an idea of what Alexandria looked like? Map. Well, you can kind of see there, it was a star fort. There's areas. I'll see if I can find another better map of it. I don't know. I'll have to do that again. The other one was Ur. You can see another star fort example. They've really made... Where's the... you can kind of tell. But there's certain areas here where they have the river going around the points, and the points allow for a canal that's going through. And you've got these squared off buildings. And we talked a bit about this idea of 8-pointed... star fort. Let's see if I can find the octagonal star forts. Square at the center of the 8-pointed star forts. So what ends up happening is you find places that had a larger, like this here again, you have a square in the center of the star fort. So then you look at places like Giza, okay, and Giza was... let's see from a map from above. Giza is built upon squares. You've got the pyramids are on top of squares, and they're doing specific math patterns. But these were on top of older structures, apparently, even, that were likely star forts, or even some of the stones might have been reused. But we have another explanation for this, and I'm going to show you that now. There's a guy, and he did an even better job than most people. I think his name is Pyramids Really Built or something. It's Massey, right? It's Chris Massey, Matt Massey. He made this interesting explanation of buoyancy, and it's really important to this whole thing in Archimedes, and I'm going to push it as an important thing, because if they were making these things out of 3D printers, and I use 3D printers a lot, they wouldn't have bricks. They would likely just make a building, because you could put again, this is built on top of a spring. That's originally what was underneath here. There's several springs. There was a spring here. There was a spring mountain underneath the 3 pyramids, except for the 3rd pyramid, and I'll explain why. Khufu's pyramid is the only one that's still remaining exactly where the spring was. But so the Khufu pyramid, it is, again, you have a star fort at the center of it that's been built around, and you have a harbor that's been built very close to the Nile to bring the Nile as close to here as possible. And what is this? You have a causeway, and we know that this causeway was used for a number of reasons. There's papers, there's cuneiform tablets, but there's literally papyri documents that talk about the bringing of the ship of the dead king who wants to be buried in the factory. And We also have documents saying Khufu didn't really build the monument. He repurposed the monument. And so we've always been saying, oh, well, he must have taken some smaller monument and made this giant thing over a 25 to 75 year time. We thought 75 years, or rather scientists and mainstream losers thought 75 years, because they didn't know that there was really a quicker solution that could be done to make this happen in 25 years or less. But even with 25 years, it's ridiculous that he would have built this thing to be his funeral parlor, right? Except for, we do understand cannibalism and the night of the ghosts, the feast of death, and all these things was very important. And because his family was so important, the pharaoh was the grand house, it is possible he felt it was important to keep his family in this temple or whatever. Just saying, unlikely that it was built by aliens. I mean, so here's also a picture of Europe, the way Europe was considered. Africa is basically considered Libya, and it's rather small looking in this map. Europe is Eurasia, that includes all the way to end of Asia, and India's underneath. You can see that they basically imply that Spain and Africa are kissing. They're very close, and that this is the most important area in the world, really, is the sea that allows you to connect to all these otherwise foreign ideologies, these different groups of people that are so alien from each other psychologically, if not biologically. And then you have this you have the sea and the Nile, but the Nile is going across Africa, so it literally goes all the way to Morocco. We talked about the Tamanrasset River, which is the river system that crossed Africa. So again, there was also the Mega Chad, and I just want to point out the Mega Chad as well, is this giant lake system, Mega Chad River system, is a giant lake system that was in the center of Africa, and there's another one in the Congo, and then there's another one under Darfur, and there's another even bigger one called No Name, and it's really the Lake X. And we start to learn about Civilization X. Do we do that? Civilization X, I think, is that a real way that they put that? It sounds so silly. But no, it's like, I can't even remember if that's the right thing, but X was in the thing. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to mention a little bit about what we found and find in Babylonian tablets. A lot of it is literally just math. There's a lot of other things as well, but this was math that was beyond the math that was being used and popularized at the time that it was found. So even in 1945, this was not common. One of the things is you can see how Archimedes and Pythagoras used equations which were thousands of years older theoretically, or at least were found in places that were removed and had been conquered by peoples that later went on. I mean, again, because you have these Phoenicians and Greeks who are from areas that went, and then they went to school in Alexandria in Egypt, which is the former Helios owned capital, or in Canaan. So they knew these kinds of things from elsewhere. So you've got this, for instance, equation, which wouldn't have been written this way at the time, obviously, but you've got this idea of the factor against its derivative, and it's doing this by saying x would not be usually a 10. 1 is equal to 60. Instead of a 10-base system, they're using a 60-base system. So all of a sudden, easy divisions can happen because you're thinking to yourself, okay, like what is a third of an hour, because you're thinking, in terms, the math already if you ever used a clock, because you're thinking there's 20, 40, 60 minutes in an hour, so 3 20-minute pieces, or etc. And there's a number of ways that this was a lot easier because you get perfect divisions. You could get without fractions a lot of the time. And then they would have a system to write these down, which is phenomenally similar to the Mayan calendar. The Mayan calendar uses dots and lines. This uses notches, but the notches are in different directions. It's right angled to be 5. It is coming down to be 1. And you can then put them in certain orders, and you can see where this kind of math is more similar to the Roman numeral system. And so it's also interesting that Roman numeral system math was eventually replaced. And where do you start to see it before Greek math before Greek math, Hellenized math, is in Egypt, because that's where the Alexandrians started to use this math for the purpose of understanding nature and the flood. And so they could say, one of the most important theorems, right? A squared plus B squared equals C squared, which you think of as like A of apples, or B of apples plus C of apples, or something. I mean, it's just because they're of like things, or they work together. You can count them together because they are all apples. They are not apples and oranges, right? And you're able to count them together. And law of equivalencies have a lot of problems, but for whatever reason, it seems to work well enough that they've used it for a long time, and it made its way into Greek math. But Greek math has this idea of presuppositions. I'm going to show you a video. I'm just going to show you a video. Hold on. Check this out. Oh, yeah. Do you guys like Feynman? I hope so. He says some stuff that's not perfect, but he says some stuff that's been proven wrong, but that's awesome because it proves the point of what he's actually talking about, which is that you don't really need to know all of the pieces of a puzzle in order to, and if you do know all the pieces of the puzzle, you might be giving yourself bias, because usually what it is you have to have a way that you can get back. All right, just going to let him talk.
Mathematics. Mathematics, then, is a way of going from one set of statements to another. It's evidently useful in physics because we have all these different ways that we can speak of things, and it permits us to develop consequences and analyze the situations and change the laws in different ways, and to connect all the various statements, so that, as a matter of fact, the total amount that a physicist knows is very little. He has only to remember the rules for getting from one place to another, and he's able to do it then. In other words, all of the various statements about equal times, the forces in a direction of the radius, and so on, are all interconnected by reasoning. Now an interesting question comes up. Is there some pattern to it? Is there a place to begin fundamental principles and deduce the whole works? Or is there some particular pattern or order in nature in which we can understand that these are more fundamental statements and these are more consequential statements? There are two kinds of ways of looking at mathematics, which for the purpose of this lecture I will call the Babylonian tradition and the Greek tradition. In Babylonian schools in mathematics, the student would learn something by doing a large number of examples until he caught on to the general rules. Also, a large amount of geometry, for example, was known. A lot of properties of circles, theorem of Pythagoras, for example, formulas for the areas of cubes and triangles and everything else. And some degree of argument was available to go from one thing to another. Tables of numerical quantities were available so that you could solve elaborate equations and so on. Everything was prepared for calculating things out. But Euclid discovered that there was a way in which all of the theorems of geometry could be ordered from a set of axioms that were particularly simple. And you're all familiar with that much geometry, I'm sure. But the Babylonian attitude was, if I make my way of talking what I call Babylonian mathematics, is that you know all these various theorems and many of the connections in between, but you've never really realized that it could all come up from a bunch of axioms. Modern mathematics, the most modern mathematics, concentrates on axioms and demonstrations within a very definite framework of conventions of what's acceptable and not acceptable as axioms. For example, in geometry, it takes something like Euclid's axioms modified to be made more perfect, and then to show the deduction of the system. For instance, it would not be expected that a theorem like Pythagoras' is that the sum of the squares of the areas of squares put on the sides of the triangle will equal the area of a square on a hypotenuse should be an axiom. On the other hand, from another point of view of geometry, that of Descartes, the Pythagorean theorem is an axiom. So the first thing we have to worry about is that even in mathematics, you can start in different places. Because of all these various theorems are interconnected by reasoning, there isn't any real way to say, well, these on the bottom here are the bottom, and these are connected through logic. Because if you were told this one instead, or this one, you could also run the logic the other way if you weren't told that one, and work out that one. It's like a bridge with lots of members, and it's over-connected. If pieces have dropped out, you can reconnect it another way. The mathematical tradition of today is to start with some particular ones which are chosen by some kind of convention to be axioms, and then to build up the structure from there. The Babylonian thing that I'm talking about, which I don't really not Babylonian, but it's to say, well, I happen to know this, and I happen to know that, and maybe I know that, and I work everything out from there. And tomorrow I forgot that this was true, but I remembered that this was true, and then I reconstruct it again, and so on. I'm never quite sure of where I'm supposed to begin and where I'm supposed to end. I just remember enough all the time so that as the memory fades and the pieces fall out, I put the thing back together again every day. The method of starting from the axioms is not efficient in obtaining the theorems. In working something out in geometry, you're not very efficient if each time you have to start back at the axioms. But if you have to remember a few things in the geometry, you can always get somewhere else. It's much more efficient to do it the other way. And what the best axioms are not exactly the same, in fact are not ever the same, as the most efficient way of getting around in the territory. In physics, we need the Babylonian method and not the Euclidean or Greek method, and I would like to say why. The problem in the Euclidean method is to make something about the axioms a little bit more interesting or important. But the question that we have is, in the case of gravitation, is it more important, is it more basic, is it more fundamental, is it a better axiom to say that the force is directed toward the sun, or to say that equal areas are swept in equal time? Well, from one point of view, the forces is better, because if I state what the forces are, I can deal with a system with many particles in which the orbits are no longer ellipses because of the pull of one on the other, and the theorem about equal areas fails. Therefore, I think that the force law ought to be an axiom instead of the other. On the other hand, the principle that equal times are swept out in equal areas are swept out in equal times can be generalized when there's a system of a large number of particles to another theorem, which I had prepared to explain, but I see I'm running out of time. But there's another statement which is a little more general than equal areas in equal times. Well, I have to state what it is. It's rather complicated to say, and it's not quite as pretty as this one, but it's obviously the son of this one. I mean, it's the offspring. If you look at all these particles, Jupiter, Saturn, the sun, and all these things going around, lots of stars or whatever they are, all interacting with each other, and look at it from far away and project it on a plane, like this picture, then everything is moving this way, and moving that way, and so on. Then take any point at all, say this point, and then calculate how much each one is changing its area, how much area is being swept out by the radius to every particle, and add them all together. But wait, those masses which are heavier count more strongly. If this is twice as heavy as this one, then this area, it counts twice as much.
You can get by. I'll give you the other half another time. So the point of that, why I was sharing Feynman's analysis, is that building structures upon reason only works so far. Something that happened in Babylonian mathematics was they said, wait, can we use these formulas? And they started creating these ideas of formulas, and some of those formulas actually work, right? And that's the thing. You'd say, wait a second, is this... It's not like a mathematical, like 2 plus 2 kind of thing. It's more like 2 apples. It's ideas. It's like fractions and all these ideas that eventually became Euclidean or Pythagorean or Archimedean. You know, these are ideas that are much, much older. Let me show you an example. Obviously, I do this again. Babylonians used Pythagorean theorem 1,000 years before it was, quote, invented in ancient Greece. And this is like how recent. I mean, I've been saying this for years, but you know, now I get to say the mainstream knows it. And good for them. But a real old tablet, according to their own records, has revealed that ancient Babylonians understood the Pythagorean theorem more than 1,000 years before the birth of Greek philosopher Pythagoras, who's widely associated with the idea. Also, we got to work on this whole calling everybody Greek just because they live there kind of thing, right? Like, I mean, you know, is Ryan Long American? Like, this isn't nice. Like, Pythagoras was from Tyre, right? He was Phoenician. He was a Semitic, Canaanite, Phoenician, or something like that. But he was from Tyre. He was definitely not. He was Tartarian, bro. So the tablet's known as SI 427 was used by ancient land surveyors to draw accurate boundaries. Okay, and this is going to come in again important because of boundaries. You're like, well, who cares? Is it just for private property? No, it's for flood seasons and monsoons. Engraved with cuneiform markings, which for mathematical tables instructed the readers on how to make accurate right triangles. And again, I'm saying this because we talk a lot about stuff that was built by giants and people trying to do amazing things. But then when you look at bricks, when you look at clay things, and you see that some of this stuff is really just made afterwards by humans. Like a lot of this stuff is just normal, and it's not that. There's a reason why they were occultic about these ideas. But it's not that they elevated the bricks, and it's not that they poured the bricks with lava, because again, they can do that. You could make an entire mountain out of lava. They made them out of stones for a reason. It's part of the technology. Okay, and again, because of the Nile flooding. And what happens is it's a desert except for 3 times a year. And when the flooding comes, if you've made boundaries and you've dug out trenches, you can have huge reservoirs stored. And so storing reservoirs became an important matter, being able to store a certain amount of water, etc. Then they were able to have water throughout the year. And it came into storing water during the inundation, which is the flood, using the water, and then harvesting the plants at the appropriate time. And they knew that when the right time happened, the sun was over the certain mountain, and then during the second time, during the solstice, it was more the other direction. And then during the end of the year, it came from another part. And so just because it was pretty common, they were able to map out, okay, well, we better start harvest around now and keep track of the days, or else people died. So it was important enough that this mattered. It's not that there weren't other things that mattered. It's not that there wasn't other technologies. I'm just saying in this particular case. And the other thing you remember is like the ziggurat, right? So where is the? Let me go to the ziggurat page. Well, yeah, okay. So a ziggurat. These are the older step pyramids, and you see them all over the place. And look at this, right? This is dirt a lot of the time, and there are some that are made of mud bricks, and the mud bricks have melted. And then those have become actual mountains. Mud bricks especially will become mountains again. And you can still tell in certain circumstances. And we were able to prove that these were bricked at one point. But they do become conform to nature. And that's actually kind of, I think, part of the point in some of the original temples. Because then you put plants on them and they grow into hills. And you've seen like the Bosnian pyramids. And the Bosnian pyramids similarly are, they've turned back into kind of natural monuments, and some people are like, is this even man-made at all? Right? Well, yeah, it is. And then there's also the Hopewell mounds, which similarly are, like, hey, what, are these even man-made? Well, yeah, of course they're man-made. Like, they're even more man-made to you because they're less angular. It's funny that that's how that works. Because they're spiraled and weird, we know these are man-made. But so these were also designed to turn back into monuments of nature, okay? So, but then what you have is also this idea of, and let me see if I can find this, Egyptian math after, antediluvian, I think is the way they like to say it. Antediluvian, Egyptian, well, there's this idea, right, that there's a flood, and the Egyptians have stories of a flood as well. And this idea that the Egyptians took technology, and that other groups as well took technology after a deluge, right? And that's part of the story, and ended up in parts of these beaches that were the dry beaches and survived that way, okay? And Egypt in that area, again, we have the Valley of the Whales, which is the valley is the Wadi, again, so we know the Wadi is a valley, but it also has to do with the water, where all these beached whales have shown up. And there's all kinds of different weird beached whales in this area. And again, we've talked about how if something's not a desert and it's not flowing, you get swamplands, so swamplands. So Egypt was covered in swamplands, these, just like America was covered in swamplands, and it started to be, there are still parts of America that are covered in swamplands, but huge parts of Africa, look at this, Savannah, Georgia, right? So you get the idea the swamps are very frequent in parts of Africa. It'll happen. They get crocodiles, hippos, the Nile extends, and this is what it looked like in the area. This is a great idea, a great way to show you where the Sphinx was. Probably looked something like this and had been worn away. Let me see also if I can find this picture of, okay, these guys. So imagine in Giza, where Khufu has the Sphinx, that there's some sort of these things, and everyone's always trying to come up with some fancy explanation for what they are. I'm not going to do that right now. Instead, I'm going to say because of that, it's likely that the ancients did that as well. And so for them to have carved it and things like it into I mean, this thing, look at it. It's got the body of an animal, essentially, and it's just ready to be carved. So, you know, we do this today. You've seen carvings. I propose this is why they took a monument that was a natural occurring monument, in some respect natural. It could have been magical or some kind of interesting thing before that. But I'm just saying that, yeah, of course, they carved it. And it's interesting, again, that it's not in the shape of a bull. That's another reason I'm kind of convinced it wasn't really built originally in the age of Taurus, which is something, you know, people are like, Leo, Taurus, maybe. I think that it has more to do with Bastet, the cat, because cats were associated with Horus and Osiris, particularly Horus, and that, you know, Bastet was, you know, the original sin, and this probably was a freaking cat. And then they put the face of somebody else on it, maybe twice, right? It could have been Akhenaten, and then his face was changed to Ramses, and then someone just spited the face. And I think that could have been a thing, is that someone said, hey, this guy went and changed one of our desert statues that we have in this little valley area. So I think that's something to consider. Okay, moving on, a little bit of the math. There's a lot of importance about why this formula matters. Here's an interesting thing. Alexandria, Mediterranean city port in Egypt, founded by Alexander the Great on top of Heliopolis. This is where the Library of Alexandria was, and it's also where the Lighthouse of Alexandria was. And you can tell, again, it's this fort with this giant lighthouse, and we talk a lot about the importance of lighthouses. The lighthouse was the symbol of Alexandria. And you can see the Lighthouse of Alexandria presented as kind of the Tower of Babel here at Pharos, right? Pharos Island. And this sprawling man-made city to the island with bridges winding to Alexandria to own. It's an important depiction. Also, the idea of burning down the Pharos because people hated him, and he was killed eventually. Alexander was poisoned, and his government was taken over, and then a man declared himself the divine pharaoh and took over, saying he was the immaculate new God on earth, emperor. And so things and this is only 300 years before Christ, or is that right? I think that's right. I want to make sure I got that right. Let me go back for a second. So it's like 300 years theoretically BC, and it's this idea of Okay, and now we can get into the fun stuff, actually. So, 1 second. Where's my... Oh, no. I'm gonna be prudent. And before that, we're gonna talk about Borobudur. Somebody made a video, and I wanted to give them credit. Does he exist? Did I put his name somewhere just so I could remember? I saw somebody's video, and I thought it was good. If I come across his name again, I will tell you what it is. But I can't remember right now. I'm sorry. It was like Joey or Jordan, something or other. And he did a video recently about Borobudur, and it was really good. Anyway, Borobudur is a Indonesian temple that is very important. And there's a number of these Ziggurats, right? They're Ziggurats. And we want to say, okay, these are designed by aliens sometimes. But I think recent Tartarian is the better answer, because you can see the technology is something that is accomplishable, and the reason it matters again is because it's not lava poured, and some of the stones could be lava poured, like the more interesting, intricate aspects of them. But this is something that it's actually, these are bricks that are achievable, so it's something different than like a sand castle where you pour sand into a shape, because it could be glass. It literally could be glass that's all bent, and there's a reason it's not. And the fact that it's made out of durable stones, it shows another thing. Also, they don't reach all the way to the heavens in the sense of being really tall, but they do have these weird altars, these altars with bells, and bells become the important thing. The bell temples, the temples of Baal, the idea of resonance, and we've talked a lot about resonance in temples and the idea that resonance is important. So, but I'd like to propose to you that the Ziggurats are all related, and there's reasons why these cultures are, after the deluge, trying to remanufacture what they can, because things have fallen apart, and they're taking the pieces they can, and they're trying to put them into semblance of what they recall. And most of them have been experts. So the people that end up in charge of each group have been experts in one field or another after the deluge. And so that's why, some of them are experts at one thing, some of them are experts at another thing, but there is this idea of disassociation from each other, which is that Babylonian thing, right? In the story of the Tower of Babel, that they're building the tower, or maybe they're building towers, and they're separated from each other so they can't communicate very clearly. And it plays into that idea of the map of Herodotus, right? That Europe was so close, that Eurasia was was so close, everything was so close together, and that things were pushed apart ideologically, if not also in terms of geography a bit, through earthquakes and everything else. Okay, another thing I thought was interesting, somehow I keep forgetting to bring this up. Let me go back to Taman Reset. The shockwave. So you guys remember the Tonga nation thing? Like Tonga was this big deal. Everyone was like, news, Tonga explosions, super volcano with the powerful enough to reach space, knew him, blah. Super volcano. Terrifying, right? Well, a large underwater volcanic eruption on January 15th, 2022 in the Pacific island nation of Tonga created a planetary shockwave that circled the Earth at least 3 times over several days. The antipode of the pressure wave was in Taman Reset. The initial shockwave reached the city about 18 hours after the explosion. So, nuclear testing, all this stuff, important city oases connecting the Mega Chad to the river system that Herodotus said covered the continent of Africa or Liberia. So that's pretty trippy that they're connected that way. But it tells you a little bit about earthquakes and volcanoes and their correlation and why volcanoes are so important to us. Anyway, the White Temple and the Ziggurat at Warka. And so you start to see these temples. Again, this guy is only 200 to 300 feet tall. This one might have been 300 feet tall. The pyramids are 457 feet tall. Well, the tall pyramid of Khufu. So, and you can see brutalist architecture in Afghanistan, where they started to reconstruct these ziggurat style buildings, and they all have this flat top. Instead of reaching the heaven, it's like they are a rocket launching platform, right, or something like that. They're flat altars that they think they can reach the heavens from whatever perspective or not. It's not so much that they're physically touching the heavens; it's that from there they can reach the heavens. I'm not going ancient aliens on you. This is where your technology bit can come in, though, is that things that used to go right here. And there's all these stories about, indigenous people that the United States flew helicopters down to, gave them some food, flew away. And then for a century afterwards, they're making bamboo structures of helicopters, right? And fake landing pads, hoping that the gods will land again. Maybe that's too much. But I think that this is that's a little closer to what happened here, because these things collapsed with earthquakes. There's a huge let me go back to the city of Ur, earthquake, volcano, anything, destruction. Are they going to tell you? No, I guess not. City of Ur, volcano, because basically what happened was there was a major disaster, and people died, and then it was conquered because people were dead. That's what happens, is like something falls apart and people die. And you get to understand, how often do volcanoes happen? Well, that's, especially in this area, and what do they look like? Well, volcanoes are like boom, that part. And sometimes they don't just go erupt, they go explode. Like the Tonga was an explosion. It's labeled as an explosion. It's not just an eruption. And these guys, they're huge. Now, then you have things where they fall out of the volcano. Like, let's say the entire top of this thing shoots out, right? So you have this bullet that's 10 miles wide, but it does break down because it's brick or it's rock or it's stone. So you end up with maybe only a small wad of iron that's been purified at the center, about the size of 3 meters or something like that. And when it impacts, it also makes a crater. So you have craters that are created from this. And then you have the desert glass in the area, which is the other weird thing. So let's go real quickly. Let's do the desert glass, Libya. I do this every time. Cool. So this shouldn't happen, right? Because the idea is that superheat that causes the chemical bonding of vanadium and calcium to silicate to make the sand into glass, especially all over the place, would require an atomic blast, quote unquote, or a super explosion in ways that volcanoes are supposed to be more steady. It doesn't make a lot of sense from our understanding unless you start to look at modern research into volcanoes and see how volcanoes really work. Because super shock waves and what we know about Gabon nuclear volcano. So there's the nuclear volcanoes of Gabon. Fission for explanation. Gabon's natural nuclear reactor. I've covered this before. I just want to do it again. Maybe not mom-tastic, though. Let's see if we can find... even Wikipedia would be better than that. They're really trying to mess with me here. Science. Anybody? Some real stuff there? Okay. Here's how you got to do it. If they're ever trying to hide your information from you, you go to the Wikipedia just for a second. Don't worry. And then you can go down to the base, and they know. They're like, "Oh, he's going to try." Oh, and they've tried to move. Wow. Did they move everything? What happened? It's like gone, bro. Natural fission reactor. Okay, they've tried to split the page up. That is crazy. If you type Oklo, it might be easier because Oklo is in Gabon, and that's what they're going to talk about. The natural nuclear reactor at Oklo, comparison with modern nuclear reactors. Plenty of scientists were just like, dang, how am I supposed to blue pill myself on this one? And over a period of time, they finally found an excuse that makes sense, which is that nature somehow became a nuclear reactor. And you know what? That's great. That's great for them. But the point is that you have an example of nuclear reactor. So it's not that I'm saying also that there's no technology in these areas. Okay. Tourist guide to the most 10 amazing volcanoes in Saudi Arabia. So here's one, the Jabal Qadar stratovolcano in Medina. Do you notice there's another right behind it? And another there. And then look over there. There's a bunch of volcanoes places here. In fact, I saw, look at this guy too. Just boom, impact. And then over there, more areas that could have actually just been impacts from the volcano. I got to show you some pictures of eruptions in California, in Davis and Chico. In Chico, I remember swimming in these geyser pools that were made from volcanic eruptions, and it's clearly like the stuff they put in ashtrays. That's like that lava rock, but way bigger, and it's also blasted out these huge ravines and canals, and so you can swim in it. Anyway, look at these volcanoes. There's down in Jabal. There's up in Herat. Up in Herat, Al-Hara is close to the Canaanite region, right? And so that becomes important for where we finally get into what the video was labeled for. Where did I put it? Is it here? Yeah, it's there. Okay. Jewish god Yahweh originated in Canaanite Vulcan, says New Theory. The cult of Yahweh as a god of metallurgy originated amongst semi-nomadic copper smelters between the Bronze and Iron Age, suggests a biblical scholar, and he was not worshipped only by the Jews. Okay, so here's the deal. This idea that Abram took the local metallurgy god that was married to Asherah. Let's do that all. Asherah, God's wife. And we talked about this before. There was an episode. And yeah, you know these guys. Asherah, God's wife, raised Judeo-Christianity, partner of Yahweh, all the statues you could ever want. Yahweh used to be married to Asherah. It was quite common, and that was part of the original traditions of the Canaanites, remember? And that Yahweh was maybe not invented by Abraham, which makes sense for religious people and atheists. So if you're a religious person, God's not invented, right? So you should believe that it makes sense that he might have heard about it from someone before him, and Abram's way after Noah, so the word probably got around. The other option would be that it's not created because it's naturally formed in the ideology of these people, because Abram represents Plato's cave. I'm gonna go into this for just a real quick second. So Abram, in the Bible, cave. Abraham purchased a tomb, the cave of Plutarchus. Now let's go further. Sarah died. Where's the earlier part? Okay, well, when he's young, his father, Tara, like his dad's name is Tara, something like that. I think it's right there, right? He ends up. His dad's gonna have to kill him. I'll just tell the story. Abraham thinks his dad's gonna have to kill him when he's a baby because the god is angry. Well, there it is, Tara. Boom. Like, there you go. So he's supposed to kill his son because his son is announced by the astronomers to be a bad boon for Nimrod, the Babylonian king who builds the Tower of Babel, the Ziggurat. And so instead, Terah gives his son, Abram, to his brother or his wife's brother or something. But he's only after a few years. At first, his mother raises him in a cave. And this is an interesting thing, that he has no interaction with the outside world at first because his mother is keeping him safe. And that's, Plato's cave story, because you've got this idea of the man in a cave who has this idea. And so this is the introduction, also the relevancy anyway of Plato to the Abrahamic stories and the Abrahamic religions, because the Abrahamic religions really do originate with this idea of creation, existence, and destruction, and also getting rid of the altars, because he's in a cave. He's not familiar with the symbols and idols that they're using to represent their experiences. So his symbols and idols are, he's got this projection of what they are, right, from what he's been taught. And he's being taught that this is the god of this, and he's like, well, did that god, this is the god supposed to protect you that your mom is praying to. Well, did that god make me? No, that was another god. Well, which one? I don't know. You have to ask, go to the idol shop. And eventually he's like, that's kind of ridiculous, So he ends up, the next thing is, he doesn't know the answer yet. He ends up working in an idol shop, and his uncle is making idols, and he destroys the idols, is the idea of the religion. He destroys a bunch of the idols, and he runs off and he says, God doesn't like it when you make idols. And that's the beginning of Abrahamic religion. And it's also at an interesting time because it's right when Nimrod's trying to turn himself into a deity, a godhead, a god emperor. So he's making statues of himself and asking his people to worship himself because he can make bonfires at night, right? So there's a confluence of things going on. But even after that, Asherah continues to be kept in houses, and we see it all the way into maybe the 9th century, 6th century BC, and even beyond that. What's that called? Chinese Jews. What are they called? The Kaifeng Jews, right? I think that's their one. The Mizrahi and the Kaifeng. Okay, so when did Jews get to China? Well, they've always been in China because it's very close, and China was, the Orient arguably was part of Tartaria, definitely, and that's the way it was described in all of the books. And before the Jesuits, you have books of Mizrahi Jews getting to Tartary and living there, and Kaifeng Jews who have assimilated essentially into Tartarian culture, living in Henan and in Kaifeng. So the groups of these Jews who arrived supposedly during the Tang dynasty in 618 or earlier, we think earlier, probably maybe 200 or even 200 BC it could have been. So this is an important thing, but because we're using the flamenco calendar, it arrives perfectly at the beginning of the 11th century, that they arrived right at the 11th century. Is that, that's funny. So you get the idea, 1600s in flamenco or 11th century, but 600s. So we know they've been there for a long time, and they were found amongst Iraqi and Babylonian and Persian Jews. So there's a number of Jews in Iraq. And this is another important aspect of this, is these groups who they've been disassociated and maybe not even really honored properly amongst their communities. There's not yet been an Iraqi Jewish prime minister of Israel, for instance, and similarly of the Kaifeng Jews. And they've been keeping mitzvahs for quite a long time. And you can see some of their, here's the synagogue of the Kaifeng Jews. So Tartarian Jews in Kaifeng, an important thing. I forgot why we brought that up. It had to do with the goddess. Oh, because we find statues of the goddess in Kaifeng. There it is. That's the reason. And let me see. Kaifeng goddess. And it's because there's also a connection to their statues. And this is one of the things that they were going around China in iconoclasm and trying to destroy all of the architecture of China. And people say, well, Taiwan has the true history of China. And I would almost devil's advocate for a second and say, wait, maybe that's too Chinese. Maybe it's missing some of the influences around the borders because Taiwan doesn't have the Uyghur aspects or something like that. No, I'm not saying that PRC is going to save the Uyghur aspects, and chances are they're better off immigrating to Taiwan. But you get the point that pagodas and miniature ziggurats, and then very enlarged ziggurats, and then some of the ideology behind their architecture, for instance, that the pointed buildings have to pierce the demons that just won't die, crazy arched bridges, different kinds of mathematics. This becomes this is a great place of research if you're trying, the bells. This is a great place of research if you're trying to find out a bit more about the goddess Azara, Asherah. So there's a lot of this all the way into the future. You start to see people talking about Lilith, Adam and Eve. The elite propagandized God's worship by integrating the story of the fall of mankind into the tree, which was clearly associated with Asherah because Asherah had the tree of life. Latter-day Saints refer to the tree of life. The tree of life is the goddess maypole. You can look at it. Isis staff. Let's do that really quickly. Oh, they're going to think I'm talking about the managers, but I mean, there's a staff in every picture. Hermes staff. The staff, this is, let me just explain how Gandalf's staff's important. Moses' staff, right? Oh, and this is something that came up recently, I realized. I mentioned that the staff is given to him by his Egyptian brother, who he's Pharaoh and he's Akhenaten, and we can go into that more, but the staff is magical and turns into snakes. Kind of the way the staff is, wrapped in snakes. Okay, so you get the point that this is the staff of Moses, right? Which is the staff of ancient Egypt. Where was I getting with this? Oh, yeah. What's that bounty hunter movie? Like Boba Fett staff, is that right? Yeah, because in Boba Fett, he makes a freaking staff in the desert when he gets converted by the Sand People. So, direct analogy to Moses or Akhenaten. Both have the story of going in Akhenaten to the Bedouin community of the Tartar Berbers, or Boba Fett going into the Sand People is similar to Moses connecting with the Ishmaelites and getting Joseph's daughter. So, worth noticing, the staff is important. Okay. Pillars, goddesses, puzzle, missing pieces. What's her deal? Connected to volcanoes because she births the suns. Anuit births the suns. This all becomes really important later. Let's get into the volcano thing now. Now let's set that all up. It's crazy how much setup I need to do something. Timna, around 3,200 years ago, the great empires around the Mediterranean and the Middle East suddenly imploded. The Egyptians retreated from Canaan and the copper mines of Timna in the Negev, sulking back to the banks of the Nile, and in the arid wastes of southern Canaan, a new power arose. The Timna mines were taken over by a semi-nomadic tribes, which set up a mining operation that dwarfed the previous Egyptian industry. Let's just really quickly show what they're talking about. Edomite metalworkers were elites, not slaves. And I think I had something just really quickly I have to jump on while I got the chance, because otherwise I'm not going to remember. Where is it? Oh, it's in the other chapter. I'll do it later. Damascus steel is connected to the elites mining vanadium, which, we'll get into that. It's, very important. Elon Musk wants back his mines. This new desert kingdom would leave its mark on the main building at Timna, the Egyptian temple of Hathor, protector of miners. Okay, so this is something we talked about the other day. Also, as Hathor was the golden calf, the woman who wandered in the land of the dead, the woman who helped lovers. Hathor head thought to be of the goddess Hathor, blah, blah, blah. Caves, mining tunnels into the sandstones of Timnah. That looks beautiful. Just so you know what kind of caves we're dealing with. And is there any more pictures of Hathor? Nah. Well, Hathor is the golden calf, and she comes up as being important over and over again. I'll just do it. Why not? Hathor calf. Hathor temple is also where the city of the sun gods built upon again. Hathor. Nice. I like that. Yeah, so there you go. Can you even show that on TV? That's Hathor. I don't know. So, protector of miners, the new master smashed the effigy of the Egyptian deity, leaving fragments to be found by archaeologists for more than 3,000 years later, and setting up over the ruins of the temple a tent sanctuary, judging by the remains of heavy red and yellow fabric found in the 1970s. There they worshipped a new god, one that had no apparent name or face. That miner's god was none other than the deity known by the 4 Hebrew letters Yahweh, who would become Yimcha, right? Who would become God of the Jews and by extension of Christians and of Muslims, claimed Nassim Amzalag, a biblical studies researcher at Ben Gurion University. According to Amzalag, long before becoming the deity of the Israelites, Yahweh was a god of metallurgy in the ancient Canaanite pantheon, worshipped by smelters and metal workers throughout the Levant, not just by the Hebrews. His theory is not exactly widely accepted, but it has been recently gaining traction, roughly from the 19th century. Biblical scholars began looking at scripture less as records of divine relations and more as historical and literary documents. This has led, for example, to the so-called documentary hypothesis, which considers the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, to be a compilation from multiple sources, each produced by different authors with their own beliefs and agendas. But mysteries remain. Where did the Yahweh cult originate? Who were the first people to worship him? I mean, we can get into... Oh, no, they have answers. Good, I was worried. Most scholars already believe... but followers of El, the main god of the Canaanite dialect. So Elohim comes from, El, and they're like, well, who is God? Who is El? Well, this is the real El. And so there's a natural progression of people who just don't have the whole story. Even when Abraham's telling them stuff, it's like, no, dude, it's not Abram. It's Abraham now, and you can't have any. Most scholars already believe that the cult of Yahweh first emerged somewhere in the Levant, partly based on Egyptian texts from the late 2nd millennium. These documents describe groups of Canaanite nomads collectively known as the Shazu. And the Shazu, by the way, I'll just show you the Shazu real quick. You got some pictures of hieroglyphs of them all tied up looking funny. Look at this. This is just mean, right? That's how they tie up the Shazu. But prisoners depicted in Ramses III's relief, Ramoses III, and his... So Semitic speaking, cattle nomads, people that move their cattle from one side to the other side of lands during flood seasons to other sides of lands during flood seasons, right? And so you'll see that to call these people, this nation, a state is very confusing because their state would be a land-bound resource at this point, and now a state is considered the legitimate source of violence, even though a nation should be made, but a nation's not considered the legitimate source of violence unless the nation's in control of a state, but a state doesn't have to have land. It gets really freaking confusing. So the Bible itself may contain a memory of this southern origin of Yahweh, as it tells us explicitly that God came from Teman, or that he went out of Seir and marched out of Edom, all toponyms associated with the area ranging from Sinai to Negev in northern Arabia. And so, again, Negev in northern Arabia. I hope I still have my picture up of the volcanoes. Did I lose my volcano thing? I would. But remember, Saudi Arabia, okay, and we're talking about all these volcanoes. And when you start to look into the volcanoes, when they went off, perfect timing for people to say, whoa, that volcano killed everybody except for me. I must be special. And also, hey, it left all the people's stuff for me. Yay. That was a big part of worshiping volcanoes. And also, volcanoes made metal and resources and energy and were the sources of the reset society before it. So often on top of us, for instance, the pyramids are built on technically volcanoes because there's a geothermal spring underneath them. It's not the most violent volcano, but a geyser is still pretty impressive. So taking the geyser and building it into a pyramid says a lot about their ziggurat, and also that it's 150 feet taller than the older Tower of Babel, the literal Tower of Babel, shorter than the pyramids. What were they trying to do? Why? So because the deluge, and after the deluge, they're like, well, we got to really, really step it up. Everybody recognizes the southern origins of Yahweh, but most scholars stop there. Amzalik says, this forms the basis of my theory as well, but I take it a step forward. Reading between the lines, the Bible contains clues pointing to an original identity for Yahweh as a metallurgical deity, he says. In the Bible, Yahweh's appearance is usually accompanied by volcanic-like phenomena. When he descends upon Mount Sinai to reveal the Torah to the Jews, the mountain erupts in fire, spewing lava and billowing clouds accompanied by earthquakes and thunderstorms in Exodus 19, verse 16 through 19. In antiquity, metallurgical deities like the Greek Hephaestus or his eponymous Roman equivalent, Vulcan, were associated with volcanic descriptions, which clearly and closely mirror the smoke, fire, and black slag and molten red metal produced in the smelting process. Poetic metaphors throughout the Bible describe Yahweh as a fiery deity who makes the mountains smoke, Psalms 144, verse 5, and melts them down, Isaiah 63, verse 19b, just like smelters melt down ore to obtain copper and other metals. The researcher notes, in fact, that Psalm 18, verse 18, two perfect numbers, Yahweh is depicted as an anthropomorphized furnace. Smoke rose from his nostrils, consuming fire came from his mouth, and burning coals blazed out of it. Hey, let's go ahead and continue that train of thought for a second. Everybody, Abraham's thrown into the artificial furnace fire at night that Nimrod's created, and it turns into a green garden, and he survives it. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are thrown into the furnace, come out alive. So he controls the furnace. I get that. That's one of the things he does, at least early on, before Abram's ideology gets really set in. I get that. Let me see here. To the ancient people, the process of melting down rocks to extract metal would have apparently completely preternatural, would have appeared completely preternatural and required a divine explanation. Yahweh's metallurgical attributes were also on display in the pillars of fire and smoke by which he guides the Hebrews through the desert, Exodus 13:21, and the cloud that accompanies his visits to the tent of meetings, a simpler version of the tabernacle in which Moses speaks face to face with God. The description of this tent bears remarkable similarities to the sanctuary in Timnah, further suggesting that 3,000 years ago this place may have been dedicated to the worship of Yahweh, Amzalik maintains. Yahweh, the god of the Edomites? But wait a minute. The Bible and most archaeologists agree that after the collapse of the Egyptian Empire in the 12th century BC, Timnah was taken over by the Edomites, not the Israelites. And there's a little article there that we can jump into. Okay. I might as well. You know what? I'll save it for a time. Okay. While the Bible goes to great lengths to describe Israel's neighbors, such as the Edomites, the Midianites, and the Moabites, as dastardly pagans, the text also portrays that Yahweh was worshipped by these nations too, possibly even before the Israelites did as well. Mzalek notes Genesis 36, for example, makes it clear that the Edomites are descendants of Esau, Jacob's brother, and lists Edomites monarchs who ruled before any Israelite king reigned. The Edomites and the Moabites are listed as descendants of Lot, the nephew of Abraham and pious Yahweh, believer who escaped the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. You know what that was? Total earthquake, right? With that Libyan sand, everything turned into glass and salt. In other words, the genealogies of the Bible contain the memory of an ancient confederation of Canaanite peoples who may have considered themselves all descendants of Abraham and who all worshipped Yahweh alongside other gods. I mean, well, they would have all been descended from Noah. Am I right? Am I right, fam? And there's a cool part of the Bible, actually, where Abraham meets Noah. I think he's like 700, Noah is, when he meets him. It's hilarious. It's in the Midrash, too. Further biblical evidence of the broadened base of worshippers can be found in the book of Exodus, where a key role is played by Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, who lives near the mountain of God, alternately called Horeb and Sinai. And it's definitely, Horeb is the Saudi Arabian side of it, not the the Israeli side of it, or the Egyptian side of it. It is Jethro who indirectly leads Moses to his first meeting with Yahweh at the burning bush, and it is he who inaugurates the tent of meetings with a sacrifice and proclaims that Yahweh is greater than all other gods. Not that there's no other gods. Henotheism. For having freed the Hebrew slaves from Egypt, 18:7-2 of Exodus. But Moses' father-in-law is not an Israelite. He is described alternatively as a Midianite priest and a Kenite. A Kenite. Let's get into Kenites. I gotta get myself some data on Kenites. I don't even really think the Kenites. Bruh, Kenites, metal workers. What? Here we go. Metal workers, metal smiths, Kenny smiths. So the metal smiths. So that's huge, dude. So we gotta get into that. And it's funny because they call him the Ishmaelite, bruh, but he's a Kenite. Well, Jethro seems pretty rad. Now, I mean, again, imagine you're like, take my daughter, take my family, take my sheep, please take them. Now, according to the Bible, the Midianites were, I mean, they also make it weird because they're like, oh, well, Moses, he had to like tend some sheep for this Arab guy. No, he was a priest. The dude had lots of money. He was doing well. He was probably hanging out. So, according to the Bible, Midianites were descendants of Midian, another son of Abraham, which again supports the idea of the existence of the extended family of the Yavistic people. The Kenites, on the other hand, are a tribe descended from Cain and described as living amongst all the people of the Levant and specialized in crafts and metalworking, which, according to Zolog, is further evidence that Yahweh's first incarnation was as a smelting god. Now, the so-called Midianite-Kenite hypothesis, which goes back to the 19th century, really, there's a whole other... Dude, okay, this is great, by the way. So I'm going to get this journal access Well, Brittany, you know what to do. You got some educational email. Open that up for me. It goes back to the 19th century when biblical scholars say Jethro's story saw Jethro's story as evidence that these groups introduced the Israelites to the worship of Yahweh. Amzalek seems to be the first to stress the metallurgical side of this hypothesis and link Yahweh specifically to the rites and cults of ancient miners and smelters in Babylon. You know what I'm saying? And this all ties into Rastafarianism, and I can't wait to get there, but that won't be today. Copper mining at Timnah and at other remote sites like Feynman, today in southern Jordan was central to the region's economy. Dude, there's so many volcanoes there too. And other workings in every town. Incidentally, you know where there's not a lot of volcanoes? Giza, right? It's like the perfect place. It's just like all the runoff from volcanoes end up there. It's like whenever there's a flood, it's because there's like a volcano goes off and the white peaks of Ethiopia just melts at Guna. And then that water flows through. Isn't that great? And then so they just get the resources of the volcano. So that makes a lot of sense. Copper mining Timnah, other remote sites like Feynman today in southern Georgia was central to the region's economy, employing not just miners and smelters, but blacksmiths, traders, and other workers in every town and village of Canaan. These people, identified as the biblical Kenites, would have been held in high regard and seen as being close to the divine because they possessed knowledge about the secret and mysterious process of copper smelting. And again, copper smelting is older than bronze smelting. It was just secret, right? So that's another important thing, is that they were smelting copper first. And I saw a great video on copper smelting earlier. You smash up the rock to get it. You burn it, melt it, and you smelt it twice. And it takes a lot of heat and two bellows, but a man can do it, especially women. And yes, there were female metallurgies, which is another reason which connects us back to the Ashara story and the Edomites goddess and the culture of worshiping the goddess that births the sun, which the sun becomes, important to Egypt because they're rejecting the goddess. So there's no doubt that at least for the Edomites and possibly for their neighbors, religion had to go hand in hand with what was their most important activity, says Eraz Ben Yosef, an archaeologist from Tel Aviv University who leads a team excavating at Timnah. They depended on the success of these operations, and they definitely would have felt the need to they needed the help of a god in the complex smelting process and in organizing these mining expeditions to distant arid areas. We have no direct proof that the metallurgical god that was worshipped at the Edomite sanctuary at Timnah from the 12th century to the 10th century BC was Yahweh. There are no inscriptions invoking his name, but the kinship described in the Bible between the Israelites and the Edomites and the metallurgical attributions of Yahweh in the holy text are compelling arguments supporting Amzalig's theory that the god was worshipped by multiple peoples as a deity connecting to metallurgy. Ben Yosef concludes. There are skeptics. I mean, we can go into that, but you already get that. That's what it is. There's some stuff about Baal, and they want to say how Romer disagrees. Is a good part with Amzalig's interpretation. Supposed volcanic phenomena described in the Bible. He thinks they are more indicative of the god of storms and fertility associated with the Canaanite god Baal. Well, Baal. Let me just also do this. Baal volcanoes, and you start to check out. Baal is an amalgamation of different gods, right? And so is Bel, Bel god, Bel, yeah. Right, Marduk, and you start to get this idea of the Ziggurat being built by Marduk and his amalgamation of the different gods, saying, hey, we can all work together. You worship Steve of the sky, we worship Billy of the sky. What if Steve and Billy are really Jeff of the sky? It's a law of Babylonian equivalencies, right? And so that kind of is the beginning of that. And the Egyptians oppose it. And again, the Egyptians are isolated enough because of their water systems and flooding, and they're the only ones who really know how to work with the architecture there because of the flooding, that they're able to survive for a while until people who leave the volcanic regions come down at them, and that's the beginning of that idea of volcano worshippers who are metallurgists who make a lot of money and they get to be very powerful. Now, I also want to see, where did I put that video? Did I close it? Am I crazy? Oh, man. Okay, hold on a second. Let me find my other video tab. I think it can't be lost. I'm going to go back to the floating of the stones for the pyramid video thing, which I guess I must have closed it, which is just, I can't believe I did that. That's terrible. Hold on. Let's see here. How the pyramids were built, guys' channel. And this guy's channel. So, is it? There we go. So this guy's got this channel, and he's actually done some like VeggieTales videos kind of looking thing, where I think your kids should watch this. And these are kind of funny, and they're ridiculous, but they tell the story pretty decently. I'm gonna pull this up again and show you. Just so the idea was, we talked about this at the very beginning. I just want to cover it again. The harbor was built. The flooding is caused because of the floating of these stones, but these canals are built, and this is exactly like the Washington D.C. Canal. And apparently, I found an article, but I'll have to look for it later because I don't remember exactly where it is. I want to just move through this. That Washington D.C. used those canals, which have now been buried, and it's illegal since like a few years ago to even tell you where those canals are, but you can walk through them, and they were the secret underground tunnels of Washington D.C. But these were canals that they used to float stones in certain cases, or supplies, iron, nails, whatever. You could get a cargo crate. And the story goes that you could, again, here's some of the things. Working in water softens the stone. As soon as it dries, it's a lot harder. So they're able to scrape away at the stone. Using water makes a natural level. So the stone is flat across the water level, and you can flatten it. And then, having proven this, that the stones have indeed little notches so that you can tie ropes around them with reeds of papyri or animal skins that have been, inflated they've turned into floats. And it might seem a little more intricate than people would want to believe, but honestly, it's less intricate than you think. People do this all the time. And cutting stones in water, diamond cut tools. This is another thing. People are like, how can they cut with diamond? Well, again, volcanic metallurgists in Africa, where diamonds are very common, are able to get sand, and there's nanodiamonds. Let's also look at that really quick. Nanodiamonds, which are just in volcanic sand a lot of the time. And you'll be like, I have no idea what I'm looking at because you can't see it, you know? But if you're grinding something with diamond sandpaper, that works pretty well. So there's a lot of that. Plus, you've got perfect 51.7, 51.5? I forget if it's 51.5 degree angle. And then they can put these perfect angles cut because they cut flat across the top and they've cut the right angle of this pyramid piece. And again, water levels, simple water levels. This all matters, I swear. And I'm going to prove to you why with Archimedes and with Euclid. So, papyrus reed, wrapped float sacks, which are, you ever throw a body into the Hudson River? I hope not. But if you have, it floats. So, just so you know. And then they'd float these rocks. And here's the funniest part is that it's not, if you were to try to put the rock on top of this, you have to center it perfectly, right? Because otherwise, if it's a certain angle, it'll flip over. But if it flips over, it's fine. So now you've got this thing that is floating underneath. So it's easy to push the rocks around. This is soaked in water, so they're still malleable. They're at water level. And the entire quarry, all you got to do is tie everything up and fill it with water. And then you can start pushing them, right? Or better, you get an oxen to do it. Now, you look at this boat, and you can say, hey, it's crazy that something the weight of the pyramid can be turned into a boat. But it can, because of this law of buoyancy. And it's because in Archimedes has a formula for this, but we can find the ancient Egyptian and Babylonian formulas that and it's that Babylonian concept of math, the equivalency of something, mass is equal to its volume, and the displaced mass has to be equivalent to its weight. So they've done all these experiments. This guy's even got a video on his channel with him and his kid tying giant limestones and little limestones to bubble wrap just to show kind of the example. And bubble wrap's a pretty good example because papyrus grass is pretty light, and you saw even with just a guy on a boat made of nothing but papyrus. It's like hemp or anything else. Bamboo is a little bit heavier. I think papyrus is just ultimately one of the lightest, besides like balsa wood or something. And so you got Polynesians doing similar things. But look you got an oxen. He can lead maybe 100 of these at a time because it's weightless once it's in the water, and there can be a flow of water. The next thing is you get to this causeway. Now, everything is Legos, everything is Minecraft. It's you push the thing underneath and close the door of this, and then let water fill this chamber, and water will rise up to the top of the chamber. And they just do this one at a time because they push it, it rises up the chamber. And when it rises, you can see, I think here's an example of the kids with their little video. But you push it under, it rises to the top of the water. And because of the way water pressure works also, you can see like you fill something with water, he's got water from the base of the tube, is it right there? So because he's filled the tube all the way up, the water is all the way up. There's a pressure seal. It continues. And so you can continue to float things and you cut it there. And then the next water happens. And they close that chamber and then they add a new chamber. They continue it across. And this can be sealed with mud and with clay sediment from the river itself. So these channels are not even that complicated. And they probably, to some extent, even already existed. But here at the end of how directly up can you go? Well, you could literally have this tube go straight up, but it might have been easier to have it at this angle so that it just goes up the side of the edifice of the ziggurat. And going up the side of the edifice of the ziggurat, just every step along the way to avoid more than 2 bars of water pressure. And that's what it would be equivalent to for a 400-foot building with a mast for the size of the stones necessary. You would close different channels of the tube. So this is not that complicated. It's a plausible solution. I think it's the most plausible solution. And there's the reason also is because there's a lot of writings about it. There are papyri documents saying, we had the boat, we had the channels built. There might have been certain aspects which were trade secrets, but so much of this was kind of proven. And then again, it's on top of a spring. So the thing starts to fill up with water. Now, another interesting aspect is when you've got rocks filling this with water, you are displacing water. So even less water is needed than you realize because it's already displaced by 1,000 rocks that are all around you. Each one of these is displacing, like 100 gallons of water or whatever. And then how does the water get there? Does it have to be carried by humans? Well, we already know about water wheels and water mills and everything else. If it was being carried by hand, I think it's something like 100 or 600 buckets of water a minute could be done because they're all moving at a bucket a second with there's a certain delay in there too. But it also explains this design a lot more because you've got this path that allows things to go vertical through the pyramid, which I believe is actually more likely the way it happened was directly through the center silo. And you see the buildings that were built because of that similarly have the same design where you can float things up as they're building vertically. And at the center, you still have the center of that star fort design. So, the water pressure stories built on springs, the moat around it, the water erosion of the Sphinx. I think that all. Oh yeah, and then we have examples of these, Los Angeles style canals. I think that covers that aspect of it. Okay, so we have this idea that there are volcanoes that are going off all the time, and one of the biggest volcanoes is in Ethiopia, and that goes off, and another big volcano is in North Canaan, and that goes off, and that leads two tribes into this floodland of Egypt. And so once they're in Egypt, they start using this map. Let me jump to Archimedes for a second, and here's my Damascus steel thing I want to talk about. So Damascus steel swords were used in the Near East and composed of a type of steel books. New books can that's a quote there from the ad. This type of steel was first pioneered in India as well as in Sri Lanka in the 6th century BC, then exported globally, but it's called Damascus steel. Why is it called Damascus? Well, they trace the carbide crystalline structures of tungsten carbide and vanadium carbide. And so I found a paper on that. Let me see if I can find the Damascus steel. Is this it? Damascus steel. Almost there. There we go. Okay. Is this it? No. Yes. Damascus sword has vanadium steel. The mystery of a legendary type of sword is gradually being unlocked by scientists and smiths. A sword of Damascus steel was said to be so sharp that it could cut through a gauze kerchief or a steel helmet, and so flexible that it could bend through 90 degrees without breaking. The source of the steel presented to Alexander, an ancient Greek Roman source steel from India. The Arabs took it to Damascus, where it was used for many centuries. It is impossible to find anything to surpass the edge of Indian steel, observed the 12th century Moroccan geographer Al-Idrisi. And that's because it was lost with the destruction of the volcano in Syria. And this led to, also trying to figure out what did they have. It wasn't just India, but in the Semitic zones as well, that the kind of material they were using from the rock had vanadium. And vanadium is used to make emerald. And tungsten is used to make the tungsten rods, and also for use in lights. It's an incredible material because it can absorb energy enough that you can make high-powered lights with it. And by smashing the metal into an anvil and then pouring on top of it but volcanic ash and carbon that came from smelting work. It's burned in the burning smelting heat that would put reinforcing fibers into the iron, and so iron cementite or iron carbide would be created. An ultra high carbon steel that has super plastic properties, and so nanotechnologists working in nanotechnology, super plastic, Damascus steel. I think someone has put up an article. accidental nanotechnology. It's one of the things that everyone in nanotechnology loved. The lore of is how did they figure it out? And it's, of course, they accidentally did it probably because they were just pouring that much ash into a kiln that was from volcanic sources that eventually, and they have these faces on their furnaces too to worship their gods. But it created a carbon iron with chromium, and that's the beginning of the super steel. So super steel, another natural, logical progression of just being around volcanoes all the time. So let's see, there's another thing. Here's another great one. So the Ferris wheel. Okay, so the Ferris wheel. The Eye of Cairo. We talked about the lighthouse in Egypt. Now, the Cairo Eye, a Ferris wheel under construction in Giza, and supposed to be one of the biggest, I think, in the world. It's going to be 54,000 square feet, 390 feet, so nearly as tall as the pyramids, as tall as the Babylonian Ziggurat. And it's going to be finished by 2030. It's going to be very important. Anyway, is this new? Well, you start looking into Ferris wheels, okay? So Ferris wheels, named after the Chicago World's Fair, Ferris Bueller. No, I'm just kidding. But there's a guy named Ferris Jr., George Washington, Gale Ferris. That's even funnier than what I was going to say. And it's funnier because it's true. So the world's Columbian expedition. I don't know if you've heard of the Columbian expedition, but it's pretty important. It's this whole idea of, early history of Ferris wheels. Look at this Russian Ferris wheel. Cute little thing. I remember playing games in Dennis the Menace Park. Let's see if there's pictures of that. Dennis the Menace Park, 1950s. Is that going to work? That'd be sweet. Dennis the Menace Park in the 1950s was crazy. And they had these things like planes in the 60s that you could jump through. And there was a Ferris wheel that they tore apart that was just out of control. Let's see if we got that. Ferris wheel. It was mechanical, and there was no electricity involved, and it just spun around, and it's lost forever because they don't want you to know. But here's a picture of one from ancient Russia, which lets you know what California is really like. So here's the Turkish ups and downs, another example. And it looks like little kids, but they have beards, so you know this is made for big dudes, right? And it's got that symbol in the center there. What's going on with that, right? Well, wait, did I just lose everything because I did that? That wasn't what I wanted. Let me go back. The Ferris ups and downs, back button. Okay, so early Ferris wheels. You're kind of getting the point. Ferris wheels existed for a long time. There's early history, travels of Peter Mundy in Europe, Asia, 1600s, talking about, he's a Briton who saw the first great wheel in his life was, he saw Ottoman Balkans in Croatia on a giant crane wheel, custom house key and turning in the matter, where children sit on little seats hung round in several parts of thereof, and though in turn right up and down, and the children are sometimes on the upper part of the wheel and sometimes on the lower, yet they always sit upright. And then again, 1615, a Roman travelers who sent letters to Constantinople, Persia, and India, attended a Ramadan festival in Constantinople. He says he was delighted to find himself swept upwards and downwards at such speed, but when the wheels turned around so rapidly that a Greek who was sitting near me couldn't bear it any longer, he shouted out, "Sonny, sonny, enough, enough." So again, you start seeing that this is very common. Ferris wheels were very common. Ancient Egypt had a Ferris wheel in Giza, and that's why they're trying to replace the original Ferris wheel. Kind of an interesting thing because of the Ferris wheel of the lighthouse of Alexandria, which if you can, I saw a picture of it earlier that was, they show the wheel, and they had this idea of the wheel. I'll have to find it again, but they have pictures of wheels that are rising above and allowed for, these priests to do this. And the other thing is this idea of the ziggurat being on top of a castle, on top of a mountain, on top of a volcano every single time. And it's in order that they can avoid flood seasons, that they can rise to this safe place, that they can do their observatories and everything else. But that connection to the volcano, I think, is just something that you can't ignore. Okay, again, also looking at the lighthouse, scale to 1 to 5. comparison between a 1909 and 2006 study. So deciding that there was actually a larger building that was built beyond the inner shape. This was the brick building, and then they extended it. There's a lot of other things to go into. I want to try to do them quickly. I might have to save some more of this for tomorrow. What? There's no article on the horns of Ammon? That's ridiculous. The horns of Ammon. Dude, you can't hide from me. What do you think? We're almost to the point. Let's do it. Moses, Michelangelo. Okay, so Moses, Michelangelo. So Moses has horns. And we talked about this a little bit before. It's kind of interesting. What's the deal with the horns? Is it just a mistranslation of, what's his name? The Vulgate version of the Bible of Exodus translated by Pope Julius commissioned it. Sigmund Freud's got a whole thing on it. I think Freud missed the opportunity, really. He could have talked about how this dude comes down from a mountain and sees them worshiping a golden calf, and he's like, dude, I'm right here. I've got my own horns, man. You don't need to worship the golden calf. Look at me. It's like this jealous Juno kind of story. So, interpretation, Sigmund Freud, we now believe I permit to... I don't even need to read you that right now. Oh, I want to... last time on Adventures, we'll tell you what happened. But the shining face, interpreted as the horns, Latin Christianity, cornuta, horned, in the Latin Vulgate translation of the passage found in Exodus chapter 34, specifically verses 29, 30, and 35, in which Moses returns to the people after receiving the commandments for the second time. In Douay's Realms Bible translates the Vulgus as... And when Moses came down from the Mount Sinai, he held the 2 tablets of the testimony, and he knew not that his face was horned from the conversation of the Lord. That was Jerome's effort to faithfully translate the difficult original Hebrew text, which used Quran, based on the root keren, which often means horn. All right, but it also can mean like the horns of light, and connects to that idea of Atonism. Okay, let me go to... Cernunnos is the Gaelic Roman deity, is a Gaulish deity who had horns, and you start to see the horns, and no, we're not going to quite get to Heliophilus, I think. Heliophilus. Horn god of Wicca, Gaulish, well, you start to see him more and more. Horn god, important god with antlers, and then it just continues on, and Moses has the same tradition in the Middle Ages, because it goes to a much more ancient tradition, which was that the horns of Ammon. Okay, and so the curling ram horns use a symbol of the Egyptian deity Ammon. This guy, and his hat's covering his horns, which is kind of funny. You don't even notice it. Ramoses II with Amun and Mut at the Museo Egizio of Turin, Italy. So, I mean, he's hiding his horns underneath his cute hat. That's why he has such a tall hat. It's actually too curved to hold his horns, which is great. And then that's kind of interesting. Kamut, I mean, the phallus is usually associated with Nib and a few other cats, so kind of nice. Originally, red-brown skin, but during the Amarna period, he was painted with blue skin, symbolizing association with air. So he was red and went blue. So for those of you who think everybody started out blue, seems like a more recent thing. Atonist heresy, Pharaoh Akhenaten, advanced worship of Aten. We should do a thing really quickly on Aton math, because mathematicians love the Aton inverse function. I think it is inverse. The arctan and atan, inverse of math, atan, yeah, whatever. Okay. Not important. Hymn of Aten, across the sky. Basically, this idea that the moon is birthing the sun, that the volcano is where the sun is born from. And all of these statues of Khemutef, they had their faces deformed, right? And so some people think the lion was the Sphinx. I'm going to tell you right now, what if it's not? And what if it really is Amun? Because later they went back and changed all of the statues they could find that looked like these goat gods. I mean, it looks like a lion goat, right? But Khemutef, bull of his mother, and that means bull of his mother, right? And that's because father of your own mother. So the idea that he gave birth to, or he inseminated his own mother, his own father. It's its own thing, Leave it. So Amun depicted as Amun Min, and this is Min doing his thing, right? And then there's Re Horakati, Ra, who is the Horus of the two horizons, right? So then there's certain amounts of mixing of gods that you're starting to see happen. Anyway, Akhenaten cut off the heads, or shaved them down, and then King Tutankhamun went and put them all back, as many as he could. So I'm suggesting the Sphinx might have been actually of Amun. This matters because the horns of Amun were associated with visual similarity. We think of, again, horns and sunlight horns, and in the Bible it talks about horns of light that shine from the altar, and horns of music. And there's a lot of weird phononym to horn and ideological onyms with idionyms with horns and musical horns, like tusks, horns, antlers and musical horns. Because of the visual similarity, they were also associated with the fossil shells of ancient snails and cephalopods. So think of it also as the golden ratio, the spiral, ammonites. This is not just a horn. He's wearing ammonites in his hair. Okay? Ammon, who eventually becomes Ammon Ra. I'm going to try really hard not to put on the picture because I want you to see it. No. That's not even the one I need to worry about, actually. It was a deity of Egyptian pantheon whose popularity grew over the years until growing into a monotheistic religion in a way similar to the proposal in the Judeo-Christian deity evolved out of the ancient Semitic pantheon. Egyptian pharaohs came to follow this religion for a while, Amenhotep and Tutankhamun taking the names from their deity. This trend caught on with other Egyptian gods. Blah, da, da, da. Here we go. Alexander the Great. Jupiter Ammon. Here we go. So, Jupiter Ammon. And there's no link to it. Like, how's that going to go down? Because there's a Zeus Ammon. And that's what we're getting to. Really? Well, Jupiter, son of God, right? Because Zeus is Saturn to Jupiter. So, Zeus is son of Cronus, and Saturn is son of, Jupiter is son of Saturn. So, Zeus is Jupiter in Roman, and in Greek is, it's Zeus. But, horns everywhere. You start to see these great pictures of Zeus Ammon. Zeus Ammon. Boom. Everywhere. And the curled ram's horns built into his head. And this is all over Egypt. All over Alexandria in Egypt. It's Moses with horns. And he's the son of God. He's Akhenaten. It's all of it. It's everything. It's all, there's your whole thing. He's the father of King Alexander. Not really, but that's what Alexander would say, right? And you start to find more and more examples everywhere you go of this Zeus Ammon character. Dude, where did I go? Zeus Ammon. Not just Zeus. Zeus Ammon. There we go. See? You gotta go to like other websites to find the stuff. That's hilarious. Translate this page. French. A Greco-Egyptian deity combined the traits of the Egyptian god Amun and the Greek god Zeus. So, this is the beginning of this Alexandrian Hellenization of Egypt. The beginning of humanization of the Egyptian religion. And that's where Moses starts to emerge as well. Again, Moses, the story of Moses, because Moses and Akhenaten are exactly at the same time. So for them to start to refer to the perspective of a more supernatural figure versus a more humanistic figure, and it's an important change. It's an important distinction because one is this super deity based on a dude who's not that special, and the other is based on a guy who's just a man and does amazing things, and that becomes the religious norm is beginning in this time. So ram heads, Pliny the Elder, amongst the earliest writers to have associated spiral shell with the deity Ammon, referring to them as Ammonis, cornea, horns of Ammon, in his book Naturalis History. So you start to get more into this idea also of the sea and this idea of the deluge. And Moses then explaining, or rather Michelangelo explaining about Moses coming out. I want to save Hemophilus for next time, I think. Let me jump. Here's a good article if you want more evidence of the vanadium mines up in the north to explain why Damascus steel is, why it's connected to metallurgists that came out of the Vedas into Canaan and then into Egypt. Here's something on Babylonian mathematics. Let me jump to, is this the right one? Let me go here. We talked a bit about this idea though of the flooding everywhere, and not just of this idea of the flooding of of Africa, but of the world, of the myths of the Sumerians, of the flood, which we're going to go into, I think, next time more. But when you look at the flood in the West, the stories go that they were separated continents and that these areas were marshes, lagoons. It was a place where people got sick a lot because, and not at first, I mean, people died swimming because there's lots of sea life and sharks and everything else. But the lagoons and the beaches, what could go on for miles, would be swamps. You couldn't just cross on foot through the swamps, and you get eaten by these giant predators. So, alligators, caiman down in the south, and even bigger sharks and things that could get inland. And there's, even other crazy fish that exist in different places. As time went on, they started to be consolidated more, silted more, and that began to change the western interior seaway. We realize now that this happened not millions of years ago, but that similarly this was within the last reset. And it's interesting because it has all of the animals that we're told about in the early parts of the Bible, and all of the versions of the animals' ancestors that live today, that the Bible says, they had arms even though they were snakes, etc. Also, we start to look at these monuments where we're told, hey, this must have been 80 million years ago. But then you start to see that western Kansas had this part of inland sea maybe a couple thousand years ago at the most, and that it became swampland and it started to tear away. But with waves actually broke this up way quicker. Now, some of these, I know a lot of people want to say everything is silicon tree. Not everything is a silicon tree. Some things really are just part of the broken rock formations. This could be more than that, of course. I like the idea that a lot of rock is formed from growth of mushroom. I think that could be also what's left of the excrement of a giant mushroom that lived in that time. But we have better excuses for sediment. The thing, though, is this idea that after the flood, that they went to Africa, that they went to Egypt, because Egypt was, again, that beach sand where the whales were, beached whales were happening, and even further up into the mountains whenever possible. And the Hyksos, they're described as rulers of a foreign land that took over Egypt in the 15th dynasty, right around a few centuries after Akhenaten. And when you find out that 5 centuries before that, let me see if I can find where it says that. 5 centuries before that, they'd invade 19th century. Hyksos in the label for Abisha, Hyksos in the tomb of Kumunhotep, 1900 BC. So you start to see that they were already very influential centuries earlier at the time of Moses and before Moses during the time of Joshua. And so there's been many people, including Josephus, who originally said the Hyksos were the Hebrews and connected them. And this was where the connection to Seth comes from, the idea that Seth is the god of the foreigners and Seth is the god of the Hebrews. So connecting this Baphomet, donkey-headed, or jackal-headed, or we don't even know, by the way, like what is Seth animal? Is the Seth animal is literally a Wikipedia article. Egyptian art, Seth animal of the Shah is a totemic animal of the god Seth because Seth was identified with the Greek Typhon. The animal is commonly known as the Typhonian animal, the Typhonic beast. Unlike other totemic animals, the Seth animal is not easily identifiable in the modern animal world. There's generally agreement amongst Egyptologists that it was never a real creature and existed only in ancient Egyptian imagination. I disagree. But it's basically a freaking dog. It looks like a Dalmatian dog to me. I would say. Dalmatian dog. Let me just show you what Croatian dogs look like. Adorable, right? And so that's not even what they really like. Look at the weird pinched face thing, right? Or greyhound even. I'll make a dog. I want a greyhound Dalmatian, just so it looks like I want it to look. There you go. Yeah, look at that. That's Seth, as far as I can tell. Same thing. So maybe not, but that doesn't look that crazy to me. It does have hooves, which is maybe therefore something different. I'll give you that. But they always show it differently as time goes on. At one point, he has a flamingo beak. Kurdish Saluki, lofted ears. His feet aren't quite hoof-like, but who's to say? And other proposed animals, the jackal, the wild dog. There's been a lot of ideas for who Seth can be, but the point is he's supposed to be from somewhere else, right? That's part of the deal, is we're telling this story of foreigners that come from another land, and they're nomadic, and they've ended up here, and then they made a deal with the government, and now they're able to farm on our land. Oh, and that's the beginning of this whole thing where they're angry at these people. And as time goes on, they become more and more powerful, and because they're not just farmers, their cousins are, metal workers. They're able to, over a century or two, take over most of the government. Even just before that, with the idea that Joseph is a dream interpreter that the Pharaoh likes a lot. And he comes up with this idea. I think this is really how the Hyksos take over. He says, hey, dude, there could be a famine. Maybe it's made by us. I don't know. But you got to think of it like that also, because if there's no rain in general and they're always relying on floods, did they stop the flood season from arriving? Did they maybe up in the mountains, right? Like they blocked the water somewhere. And there's a lot of things that could have changed that weren't even weather related that could have led to this storm. And he's like, dude, we're going to store up a lot of grain, and we're going to tell people that they can buy it from us. And who was it? 3 years, 7 years? It doesn't really matter. But the idea that it took enough time that they were able to sell them things like, dude, we don't have any money left because we bought all the grain because we had no food because it's not raining and there's no flood season this year. And we've been living here for generations. What are we going to do? And then the Hyksos, under the Pharaoh, through Yuya, says, that's okay. You don't have to pay me right now. Just give me your cattle. And they're like, our cattle, but we're farmers. We need our cattle. How can we farm without our cattle? And he's like, well, it's all right. You keep your cattle, but just we'll own the cattle technically, and you'll pay a tax. You'll give us 20% of the profits you make, and we'll account for that. And they're like, now they're renting their own cattle, and they come back and they still need more grain. It's like, that's great, but we still need more grain, because we have to feed your cattle. Now we have to feed your cattle. And then he says, okay, sell me your land. It's like, well, now where are we gonna go? Because you've given us this land. This is a land that we've had for generations. He's like, well, don't worry. You can keep using your land. You can keep using my land. I will give you permission to farm my cattle on my land. And you can pay a tax and you can keep the rest of it. And that's the beginning of, by the end of that 7 years where Yuya is in control, there are no more middle-class Egyptians, right? And the middle-class Egypt doesn't arise again for a few centuries after the finishing of the conquest, maybe 12th century to the 3rd century, really, is the beginning of the 3rd century BC, is the beginning of the new middle-class Egypt. Before that, you had a lot of people that had a little bit of money, and you can see it because they're burying each other, and they're doing all kinds of cool things, and they're building these areas where they're storing water, and they don't have to work half the time because the water comes, it stores up, and then it can be saturated into their plants, and they're like, this is great. And there's no storms or floods because it's all figured out. So for a while there, it's doing really well. And then this famine comes. They're not able to have this flood. They're not able to have their water. And what happens? Well, they're like, okay, I'm going to pay this guy. I'm going to give him my wives. I'm going to give him my oxen. I'm going to end up, now they're slaves. Now this is the closest thing we have. It's not technically slavery. It's worse. This is what we have today. This is literally where you're indebted to a bank and you have to pay them for your grain based on the revenue you can make, and it's all real resource. So it's not even your labor that's counted. It's actual product that you produce. So you're saying, okay, I've got to feed them your grain. And it's literally Tyson chickens. And this drives everybody crazy. And within a century, everybody hates the Hyksos. And they're like, we got to get rid of these guys. These Hyksos are taking over everything. Nobody owns any more land in Egypt. Okay, and I think that's about where I'm going to end it today, guys. I want you to learn more about this, so we'll talk more about it tomorrow. Like, subscribe, share, get on my Patreon, go to Xirtus and Andreas.com.me. Send me super chats, send me money, keep me going, keep this channel alive. Love you all. Peace and love. Oh, and then there's my...
Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarian.
Recent Tartarian. Recent Tartarian.
Yo, I didn't even see I got a super chat. So just shout out real quick to Spyro Foropoulos. Ex-Jehovah's Witness, 30 years, got out several years ago, read a lot about Yahweh. Yahweh cult still exists. Yahweh are literally a cult by definition and believe God's name is Jehovah. Spyro, good to have you. We'll talk soon. Thanks for the super chat, man. That's how this works.
Recent Tartarian. Recent Tartarian.
Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarian.
Recent Tartarians.